Welcome to another episode of Living with FASD, Candid Conversations with Patti Kasper. This podcast is for those who are living with the effects of prenatal exposure to alcohol, their loved ones, and anyone else wanting to learn more about fetal alcohol spectrum disorders. Each week, you'll hear from someone whose expertise is either professional or living experience with FASD. I'm your host, Patti Kasper, bringing you both. Now let's get started with another candid conversation. Episode 1 of season 3, which I think the total episode number is 71 for Living with FASD, Candid Conversations with Patti Kasper. I am so thrilled to be back recording again for this current season. I took about 6 months off of recording in order to pack my family's home and move from California to North Dakota. I have missed this podcast at least as much as my faithful listeners, probably more so if that's possible, because I just really enjoy being able to bring this impact of candid conversations about fetal alcohol spectrum disorders with the world. Today is extra exciting because I bring to you the four of us that you see on this screen, the FASD Meliorists. We have all been in the FASD space for a long time. And about a year ago, we started working together as a team. We call ourselves the Meliorists because we all have that belief that the work we are doing will make a positive difference in the world. And we are all engaged in what we consider to be legacy work. And we'll be talking about that this morning. But without further ado, I'd like to introduce to everybody Deb Evenson, Antonia Rathbun, Lindsay, and Jodee Kulp, whom I think probably everyone already knows. Now, you've seen all three of these women on the podcast before, but again, today's just really special because we're going to be sharing with you the projects we've been working on for more than a year now, but collaborating for the past year together to just polish each other's work. We are all authors, and so we've been fine-tuning the work that we are all bringing to you in the publishing space, challenging each other, praising each other, refining our work. It's just been a joy. So I'm so excited to open up this season in this way. Ladies, it is so good to have you joining me for this season opener of season 3 on Living with FASD podcast. Welcome.
What an honor, Patti.
Yeah,
glad to be here with you.
Yeah.
We're so glad that you're doing this, Patti.
Oh,
We
thanks.
are. So proud of you.
Okay, am I blushing yet?
You're okay. You're doing good.
Okay, so let's talk about the work that we have done through our careers. You know, the neat thing about our team, I added it all between the four of us. We have 183 years collectively of professional experience in the fetal, and 183 years of expertise.
You know, a couple of years ago, I was doing some consulting work with a situation at a school near me here in Homer, Alaska, and a young teacher who it was her second year of teaching, and she was having trouble with this child who was misbehaving. Excuse me. And she said, you know, and I'd given her some suggestions. Then I came back the next week and she came running up to me and said, all the things you told me, they all worked. I can't believe it. They all worked. And she said, how long have you been teaching? She said, how did you learn all this? I'll never do this again. I actually told her my first year of teaching, which I'm not going to say right here because it was a very long time ago. And I said, well, I've been teaching since then. And her face went pale. She looked like she was looking at a ghost or something, like oh, my great grandmother should be in a rocking chair. I scared her. So I don't want to scare the young teachers. And I said, well, I should know a couple of things, don't you think, in that many
Don't you
years?
think?
But that reminds me, I remember the first time I met Antonia.
I remember the
So,
first time we met too. It was
yeah,
a very powerful time for me.
it
All
was
right, well, let's hear it.
Okay, I had moved from the lower 48. I taught in Colorado and a couple other states, and then I moved to Alaska. And I had quite a bit of experience as a specialist in working with children with serious behavior problems. I'd worked in a psychiatric hospital school program. I helped develop new programs in different public schools. So I'd even written a manual for teachers. I was a dyed-in-the-wool behaviorist. You reinforce the positive, you ignore the negative, you have consistent rules, and you change kids' behavior. That was the idea at the time.
It still is for most professionals.
It's still being taught. Yeah. And so, and then I moved to Alaska, moved to this wonderful town of Homer, Alaska. And after a couple of years here, I got a job working with the Department of Ed as a specialist for the state in working with children who were labeled as seriously emotionally disturbed and had their behavior was in the way of their learning. And so my job was to fly around to rural and remote communities in Alaska and help schools that didn't have a specialist on staff to set up a program to get the kids to behave, right? And so as I started doing that, I was using all my tried and true ideas, and a lot of them weren't working. And I couldn't believe it because I knew how to do them. I'm really good at behavior mod. I'm like a machine with that. My own children will tell you that. They were raised by me. But anyway, I started observing and seeing that there's something else going on in a lot of the different really remote communities. I knew there was something else going on with the kids. And so I started observing, and then I started speaking out and trying to find out what was going on. And then as I got to know the families and the parents, I realized that for the kids that were fitting this, that the techniques weren't working, that they'd been prenatally exposed to alcohol. And I started speaking out about it and got in a lot of trouble with the Department of Ed because they said, we can't talk about it. The problem's too big. That was an actual quote. I know, isn't that crazy? Anyway, so, but Dr. Jodee Kulp at the University of Fairbanks had written a grant and had learned about fetal alcohol because someone in her class, for one of her doctoral students, had adopted a child with fetal alcohol. And Steve was his name. And anyway, so she said, we need to bring people together to learn about this. And so Steve Seiss had interviewed me because he had heard of some of the work I was doing in the field. So he reported a conversation with me to his class, and Jodee called me and invited me to present at this conference that she had written the grant for, where she was bringing people from around North America who were talking about fetal alcohol syndrome, because that's all that we talked about then, and just bring people's ideas together. So she said, I'd like you to write a paper and present at this conference. And I'm like, who am I? I'm just a teacher, teacher specialist working in the Alaska bush. So I sat down with a friend of mine, Dr. Spira, who is a psychologist, and we had spent a lot of time talking about what we were seeing and trying to figure it out. And we wrote a paper together because I invited her to participate along with me because she was part of the conversation. And we wrote a paper about common misinterpretations of what we were seeing with these students. Like, it looks like non-compliance, but it's really, they're not understanding. It looks like, so we developed a whole chart, and I presented that at that conference and realized that what I was seeing in the Alaska bush in all these different schools matched the research that I didn't even know was going on. And it was like,
yeah.
So that's how I got into it. And then I heard other presenters. I got to meet Ann Strice. I met Antonia and your presentation. I met Jan Lucky. So a lot of the people were in the field were brought together. That was the time we all got together.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's when I met you. We've
Yeah.
been friends ever since, and I've loved your work.
I love yours. That presentation you gave and that matrix of ways of looking at the misinterpretation, and instead of thinking willful misconduct, thinking neurological gaps, that blew doors. It absolutely opened. It was like someone went in and opened the windows to a room and everyone went, oh, yeah, because it was what we were all describing. But you had organized it. Oh, you'd organized it in a way that was like, absolutely. And this can help families reframe. It can help teachers reframe. It can help people keep their bearings instead of getting stuck and frustrated at the mismatch between their level of expectation and what they were seeing the kids do. So it was a powerful presentation you gave. And I was there because Judith had invited me to share the work that was going on. I was doing work as an art therapist because my background involved art therapists are trained in neurological rehab, not just mental health. We're trained with rehab stuff, and rehab stuff is a different language. It's stroke rehab, brain injury rehab. It uses a different set of technologies than mental health does typically. So I had already hybridized those things and was finding that picture talk was a good way for me to get to the things that were going on in the body culture of the child that were different sensory experiences than things they could put words on. And so that's what that's what I was doing, was showing in the art how kids were, what they were experiencing and what would help them as we worked through that, as we got the snapshot of what was going in the body. Because they could randomly assign, in mental health, for example, they could randomly, people could say, okay, so this is happy, this is sad. And they could teach them those kind of word labels, but that did not help the kids that I saw access stress states in their body, which were being set off like an early car alarm by sensory things in the environment and blowing up their ability to focus, to attend, to have a quiet, alert state, to participate in what it was going on either at home or at school. It was throwing them off, and they were getting lost in the shuffle. And families, because they would use words as a medium of exchange to try and remediate things, they would often try and talk through what was going on, but they wouldn't do the thing that you and I were both describing. You were the first other person that I ever saw say, you have to walk through what you talk through with these kids. And you said that at that conference. And I went, Wayne, this woman knows her stuff. That's exactly what we're experiencing. I'm doing it with pictures. You're doing it physically, getting them up and having them. You were the one who said, what we have to do is ask them. You would say to them, so tell me what the rule is. And the child would blah, 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 repeat the rule. And you'd say, show me. And they'd go.
They didn't know. That was one of my biggest surprises.
Yeah. But that's what I thought. Since I was working with the art, I had a different way for their communication to be able to show me where the gaps were between that and what the talking was or wasn't doing. And so I had this advantage. And so we clicked, and we clicked with Jan Lutke as well.
Yeah, we really had some wonderful conversations.
Absolutely.
Late into the night. Yeah.
So that's where this collaboration solidified, was in those early beginnings, because the research was saying one thing, and in practice we were experiencing, well, how do you deal with it? What do we do to work with it?
I was doing a lot. Not all of the communities I worked in were Indigenous communities, but some of them are. One of the things I've learned from my Indigenous friends and from their traditions is observation.
Exactly.
And like the book said one thing, but as I observed, it was something different. And that's what I reported at that conference. It was different than what the book said it was.
Yeah.
And I think in our trainings, in a lot of traditional university trainings, we just teach people to think of the book and they miss what's going on. I remember an elder in a really remote Alaska community telling me about the caribou. And he was talking about some of the people in Washington, D.C. and making decisions about the caribou. And he said they don't even know what they eat because they don't see them. And
They
so
don't really know what they look like necessarily.
yeah. And so I started just
Tell them from a
observing,
moose.
watching. And I think that was such a great lesson that I learned from that Indigenous elder. Yeah.
Well, that's the thing. Okay, if we think about how do we find the solutions, we watch the person.
Yeah.
We study the person. We open our energy to the person and trust that the person is going to show us what's working or not working. That brings me to Jodee, because Jodee is this visual sponge who absorb. She was absorbing every detail when she began her journey with Liz.
So we began our journey, and I'm a researcher. I mean, that's what I do in communication, to write, or what I did professionally, not research in the way that a researcher scientist is, but to document, to dialogue, to make sure all the data is correct and coordinates together. And when we got, obviously we had this kid that was so colorful and so glimmery and so sparkly and so eclectic, and so much she is. I mean, so many people said, oh, she is on the far edge of this spectrum. And yet we had waited so long for a child that she was like this precious thing, right? Not a because we did other children, right? But we knew we could not do other children and invest in other ones permanently, because there were too many ups and downs. And when the downs came, we would have probably abandoned the whole rest of the family to focus on her. That, it just was a complicated kid. But yeah. So I have to do some shout outs here, because Bruce Ritchie did FastLink. And FastLink brought us all together in an old-fashioned style. Now, you kids don't even remember this, but everything was handwritten and would write a few paragraphs. And Antonia and Deb were on there, and Josie DeReeves and Teresa Kellerman. Oh, I just have to do a shout out for Teresa. She was a parent that just changed parenting for us, and creative and wild. Her site is still available, so if you look up Teresa Kellerman, you can still find her things. And she was a spark. And I was a young one. I mean, maybe not young in age, but young in beginning this journey. And so I was gathering every bit of information, and so I knew, because of my past and what I grew up in. I grew up next to an old, a senior citizen home, right? A retirement home. So I grew up next to a retirement home, and all my friends were senior citizens. So I had seen, as a child, without knowing anything, strokes and invalidism and, things that would set a person out. And as a child, we were kind of like their doctors, right? Because there wasn't physical therapy. We're talking years and years ago in the same way. And we would walk with them, and we'd talk with them, and they'd teach us about birds and animals and grass and plants. And they would smile, and we'd laugh together sitting on porch swings. But what we saw them change. Maybe they couldn't move their hand, and all of a sudden they could. Or, so I knew in my inner being that our bodies had neuroplasticity. I knew that before we even talked about it. It was part of who I was.
Yeah.
So we got Lizzie as a little one, and she was brilliant. She was not somebody you would think had fetal alcohol, except for her behaviors, which were way above, she was sensory diet, the whole thing. That was like extreme. Okay. But as far as talking and putting puzzles together and putting ideas together, she was brilliant. And my mother-in-law was a teacher's teacher. She taught teachers to teach children in Westchester College. And my grandmother was a child developmentalist from the 1900s. I mean, early 1900s. So her background was in Froebel, which is an interesting place to have become from. So she gave me all of her books that she had and they were somewhat from 1700s. I mean, she gave me these early child development books that were early, totally different, because parenting books, oh my goodness, there was nothing in a parenting book that was working. It was causing total chaos. And so we just pretty much put that away. And I started reading my grandmother's books, and a lot of movement, a lot of singing, a lot of hand plays. And we were able to reach Liz. When we got diagnosis at 12 and a half, I had a doctor that met with us because we did clinical nutrition for her. But when we met that doctor, he said, "Oh my goodness, that is some kid. Get her home. We will work a program for you." So he jumped on board. And then Toni Hager, who is a neurodevelopmentalist, she was from Washington, and she ran the Can Learn Academy. And she was kind of like perusing FastLink, just watching. And I was watching what she was writing, and I'm thinking, she's spot on. She's spot on. So I wrote to Toni after we got diagnosis and said, ask questions. And she said, "You know what? I'm coming through town." And what she would do is, instead of spending her money to go through town on an airplane, she would take a train all the way from Spokane all the way to Georgia, or she'd take the bus. And she would use that time as quiet time to research and write and think and contemplate. And that gave her time to deal with it. So she and I met, and today is like 13 below here, right? So she and I met on a 13 below day at the bus station, at the Greyhound bus station in Minneapolis, in the middle of the night when they stopped as she's waiting. And I'm thinking, what kind of person gets up in Minnesota at 30 below zero? And I brought a Stanley thermos of coffee, and packs a thermos of coffee and goes downtown Minneapolis in the middle of the night to meet someone you don't know. Well, not only so we talked and
somehow I think all four of
Investigators.
us would do that.
2 investigators would do that. 2 serious, deep investigators would do that.
Yeah, so I went and we met, and we clicked. And she said, "You know, next time I come through, I need you to bring Liz. I need to look at her. I need to watch her. I need to, you know." And at that point, my observation wasn't where it was at now, because now I'm a trained behaviorist for animals. But it was then just kind of but she taught me to really watch this kid. And I said, "Okay." So she gave me a couple things to do. See if this kid can do this. So I was, "Okay, we'll try these things." They're little things. And she never pushed. She was like, 30 seconds, Jode. That's all you got to do. 30 seconds a couple times a day. Don't press this kid. Don't, you know, it's all play. It's all play. You're going to keep her up on high note. Keep her on a high note.
That's
and
right.
I'm like, okay. So I went home with these things and my empty cup of thermos coffee, because we drank the whole thing. And she liked the exercises. She liked them. It's kind of like Mikey, Lizzie likes them. And on the way back, Toni says, "Meet her." So I bring her down with her sister, because at this point we have kids, you know, kids come in and out of our lives all the time. So I bring her down, and Toni's watching her. She's going, and she goes, "I don't know, Jode. No one's ever done this with a kiddo with FASD before. I believe it is brain injury. I believe that we're dealing with a brain trauma here. It doesn't say that in the literatures in the same way that we're saying it. We're talking behavior. I don't think this is behavior. I think," she said, "are you willing to work?" And she said, "Are you willing to take on a risk and work with things?" And at this point, we're not doing sensory integration with our kids. We're not doing anything. And what's Toni's deal? Toni's deal was let's look at the core. You know, how is she eating? How is she breathing? How is her blood circulating? How is, you know, can we get this body functioning as best we can?
It's Brazelton's behavioral categories. It's working from the organism up.
Yep. And that's exactly what Toni did. So she's working. And thank you, Antonio. Please just jump in, you guys, because we have never done this story together before.
Yeah.
So we did and then she was on a linear platform, right? So, she looked at the pupils, she looked at the eyes, she looked at the breathing, she looked at the ears, she looked at all these pieces of Liz. And there were 12 pieces that she really analyzed developmentally to see where she stood on the developmental scale, which is where the vortex came from. And it seems so complicated for people, but in my mind, it's not, because linear didn't give us the strategy to rebuild Lizzie's brain and neurological system.
Let me
And
stop you right there, Jode. Let me stop you right there, Jode. You mentioned the vortex.
Yes.
So, people who are watching and listening to this can see what it is you're talking about by getting your book.
Either Best I Can Be
Mm-hmm.
by Liz Kulp. It's in there, and it shows the progression and what we did in 18 months. Or Our Fascinating Journey, Keys to Brain Potential Along the Path of Prenatal Brain Injury, which I got slammed on because nobody called it brain injury, and I did it in 2001. Yeah, both of those. And people fought that Fascinating Journey. They fought it. It was, I would go to a conference to speak, and there'd be researchers trying to disprove what I'd written, and they weren't disproving it. They're finding it was valuable, and that sensory integration was important, and that working with the neurology was important, and working with movement to get to the brain was important, and working with toes and fingers to get to the head, all of that kind of stuff. Those are the kind of things Tony taught us. But then there was one piece that made it, that Tony said, Lizzie is herself, right? And so she's thinking, because I'm going to conferences speaking on allegations, on helping families that have kids in out-of-home care not deal with an allegation, child abuse, right? Or neglect or whatever, because our kids confabulate. They also tell the truth. Okay. So I'm not going to say it's not abuse. It's not neglect. These kids can easily be abused or neglected. They're tough. They're hard. But it was a balanced approach. And so she saw me going off on airplanes and speaking and going to us, just going places. So she said, Mom, I want to write a book. I want to make money like you make. She didn't know I didn't make money. This was a gift of love, right? And but I said, oh my goodness, okay. So what do you want me to write a book on? And she said, I want to write a book about my brain. Okay. I want to write a book about my brain that tells people how I think. Okay. Now I don't know how she thinks. I don't know what's going on in that little squirrel brain. I have no idea. And I said, okay, so let's start. And we started writing recipe cards, one recipe card at a time. And they weren't in any order. They were totally chaotic. And I still use this approach with recipe cards in setting timelines for people in judicial system and setting timelines for social services, where we just spontaneous voice, put it on cards, and then we chronologically sort the cards later. It doesn't matter. You don't have to remember chronologically. Just get the ideas down, and then we'll figure out the order, and we'll figure it out. And that's what we did. And so she talked and I wrote. And then she took, and then we read them back and put them in an order. And we were on a vacation because we learned that if we went out of town, that was good for her. It was hard, really hard for her. Always had to get a place where we could go get groceries, have her own bedroom. I mean, it was not an easy thing to do, but it was very important that we got it. And she wrote her book there. And it would take 20 minutes by the sunlight and a beach to write one of those pages. So that Best I Can Be book started one all the way down. And I'm thinking, I wonder what we're going to call this book. And I said, what are you going to call this book, Liz? She said, I know. We're going to call it The Best I Can Be, because that's all I can do. And I thought, that's right. That's what you can do. And I think from that book, it changed who I was, because I no longer looked at her as my kid doing stuff to me, but my partner in trying to figure out how to let her be the best she can be. And I couldn't do that with my brain. I had to do that with her brain and her ideas. And if she got overwhelmed, and she could have 2-hour meltdowns, I mean, holes in walls. Yeah, we fixed them. Little fists. Man, how about a 2-foot hole? It replaced the whole wall. Yes.
All that stuff that we know.
And yeah, she was given permission to be Liz. And she was given permission to be Liz in all her glimmers and sparkles. And and craziness. And yeah, we reaped what we sowed. I think, were you at the Kentucky conference where we blew up the conference? So maybe we'll go to
I
that
was
next.
presenting at that conference too.
So,
Yes, I
so
remember.
I brought Liz. And she was teenager, probably, no, she might have been 18. She might have been just transitioning out of home. I think she was maybe 19 at the time. And so she was in that transition. I know everything. I can do everything, and just full of it, just full of it. And it set the conference on fire. And before that, we'd gotten stopped at the security because she'd take the lighter said, do not carry lighters. So she put it in her sock.
You mean the sign when you're in the TSA at the airport where they have
Yes.
the sign that says you can't carry flammables, liquids, blah, 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 lots of words.
Yeah. So she had a lighter and she didn't want to carry it. So she put it in her sock so she wouldn't carry it.
So because to her, carry meant hold it in my hand, carry.
Yes. And she's a law keeper.
She's picture brain.
Yes, she's a law keeper. So we walk to the airplane and all of a sudden we hear, April Culp, come back to TSA. So we're like, what the heck? Maybe you forgot something. So we go back and there's the guy in the uniform and he's talking to her. Now, luckily, I have her book, right? And I'm thinking, we're going to a fetal alcohol conference and she's a speaker here. Take the book. Well, we then got moved up from airport to city security, and then we got to state security. So we got all the way up the top. I mean, it was like, these people don't make sense, and they finally let us go. We miss our airplane to get to Kentucky. It's just,
because the security guard was so upset that the lighter was still on her person.
Yes.
Even though she wasn't carrying it in her hand.
But where she
didn't understand why she didn't understand the written instructions and abstractions.
Yes. And she would not back down. She said, you said to carry. I didn't carry it. I put it in my sock so I wouldn't carry it.
I put it in my sock.
Yes. And it's your problem. Yes. And
it's not the same as carry in my hand.
Exactly. And so the state guy goes, so what should we do about it? She goes, are you stupid? What you need to do is put a circle and a line through a lighter, and I would have known exactly not to have it with me.
Picture brain.
So we come. We'll go back to the Kentucky conference because I'd like you to share your side of that, Deb.
Was she at that point?
Huh?
How old was she at that point?
19. Zach age. She was Zach age. So we come back through the conference. Kentucky has pictures on all new posters with lines through them. We get to Minneapolis, pictures with lines through them. By the time we were back in a week, they had all new signs.
I love it.
It
That's
changed
so
the
great.
world where she walked. I mean, just.
Well, I remember that conference. I remember her walking in. I remember some of the things she said. I remember how flamboyant she was. And I had some other things I was doing at the conference, so I was focused on other things too. But I'll never forget seeing her walk in the conference. I think she was in shorts, and yeah, I remember. Yeah. It was a big day. Yeah.
It was a big day. And the professionals were saying that mother, if she just parented better, that child would not be like that. And the parents were saying, yes, somebody finally gets it and they're showing what the truth is. and I got back and it was, yeah, we worked through it. We didn't work through it at the conference, but after, really had a good dialogue where they were able to listen. I don't think they were willing to change yet, but the reality was we had neuro differences.
I think it's such a big deal. Like going back to that early 90s conference, where we said in that presentation where it looks like non-compliance, it looks like maladaptive behavior. It's really not an understanding, and how big a thing that is for people in the field, because there's all these programs for teachers about getting kids to behave and the reasons kids misbehave, and they do it for revenge, and they have all sorts of reasons. And
We live in a
a
compliance.
lot of that's nonsense, but looking at somebody, like, we do the best we can.
Yeah.
And when someone keeps making the same mistake, it's not them, it's not their kids that are failing. It's us, because we haven't taught it in a way that they can understand. Because one of my biggest beliefs in life now is that we all do our best.
Mine
People
too.
don't go around trying to really mess up.
No kidding.
And so when a child comes to school and does the same behavior he or she's been doing forever, in spite of consequences, in spite of, there's something they don't get, because nobody wants to be isolated and feel shamed every day.
No.
Because that's so much fun.
Right.
Oh, yeah, right. And
it reminds me of something Patti has said. Patti would say, in psychology and in mental health, they call this self-sabotage, or that there's secondary gain or something like that from experiences of failure, as if we're setting ourselves up. And it's a very pernicious way of blaming the individual.
Is.
Yeah.
So, we look for always some intentionality. There's always a reward, right? And if it's negative, if we do something despite negative consequences, then what we assumed was the motivation wasn't the motivation. The motivation was something else. And because we can't see it, we call it secondary gain.
Right.
Apologize it that way. And it's not that at all.
It's painful for people to be handled and treated that way, because it shames us for things that are involuntary. Yeah. It's like expecting someone to hold a coffee cup with only a partial thumb. Mm-hmm. You have a hand, why can't you hold it?
Yeah.
Well, sometimes
holding it on purpose.
How hot the cup is. It depends on how big the cup is.
Right.
Versus it can depend on so many environmental factors. But to shame the individual is the first place it goes. And that's part of the compliance paradigm that we as Meliorists have been writing against, to say, neurological glitches are not voluntary misconduct.
Well, and there's another piece there, Antonia, that's so important, and that's stacking. Because, the first time you're shamed, it's like, who cares, right? But if it's every day, if it's 10 times a day, if it's 100 times a day, and you're trying your best all the time, that stacking eventually becomes social maladaptive and personally maladaptive. I mean,
it becomes painful, and then people get defensive because of the pain.
Yeah. And they eventually lose hope.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, they eventually give up.
They withdraw. They either have more difficulty with defensive behavior, or they withdraw and isolate.
Yeah, and that's when you start seeing those tertiary, effects. Where we get involved with systems because we have lost hope, because the anxiety and the depression and the self-loathing,
the discouragement,
screwing up has gotten to such momentous proportions, that we start numbing out with various addictions, whether substance or behavior, or, that's just when life spirals completely out of control.
Right.
Yeah.
Isn't it interesting that I think this is one of my biggest lessons from this adventure of the last almost 40 years of my life, that sometimes the things we try to change end up changing us. And this adventure with fetal alcohol spectrum disorders, and meeting all these wonderful people around the world, and families, and getting together and trying to come together to solve a universal problem that we're all having, it's changed my whole perspective on the world. It's changed my whole life. I a lot to be grateful for to
Me
people
too.
with fetal alcohol spectrum disorders.
Me
And
too.
I am grateful because they've
Me
made
too.
my life more rich and I've learned so much. And yeah, anyway, it's been
I
quite an
feel the same way. I feel enormous gratitude because the world
Yeah.
of neurodiversity is all of us.
Mhm.
It is all of
No,
us.
there is no one size normal. All of that is part of the monoculture. And I kind of poke that in the eye in my book pretty hard.
Yeah.
But
So
And
what
good
is your
for
book,
you.
Antonia? What is
pardon
it?
me?
What
What
is
is
your
the name
book?
of your book?
Called
Yes.
Parenting Your Porcupine.
They'd poke you in the eye with their
subtitle is
porcupine
a
quills.
toolkit. The subtitle, it's a toolkit
It's a
for,
toolkit. It's a toolkit for working with children with FASD, other drug exposures, and neurodiversity. Because in part of the thing that's so valuable right now, finally, is we have the voices of people with lived experience who are speaking back to the research community who were kind of looking at things through a microscope. The statistical researchers were looking at things through a microscope. The qualitative research is done a different way. So it creates a different set of portraits about what's there and how people are adapting and what's working as they try and adapt.
and
so
that's why the book
Yeah.
is not what you're observing in life, right? Because if we're
I was a
just looking
qualitative
at
person.
the hard science,
I was a qualitative researcher in orientation. And I worked in tandem with statistical researchers, but my feet were firmly planted in qualitative methods. And so I approached it that way, both as a clinician and in terms of the community of the families who were saying, this is our experience. Here's where we are. And then listening to the kids, this is my experience. This is how it is for me in my body, in my brain. This is how it works. And those stories about what was working for them became the fundamentals of therapeutic strategies. We found those things based on what people's bodies needed. Very individualized.
I have had the privilege of reading the draft copy of your book, and it is brilliant. I can't wait for it to get out. Every therapist, every teacher, every parent, every police officer dealing with people with neurodiversity, which is all of us, it's groundbreaking. I'm very excited for it to be out.
Well, and I feel that way about your 13 moons. I
Well.
feel that way about your 13 moons. And part of the thing that's inspired me so much is working with Patti because of Sip by Sip. When Patti, when you have told the stories in Sip by Sip, that is information, data that has never been out there.
Yes.
It is completely, it's the complete authentic world of the voices, the chorus of voices that statistical research said it looks like this, and then there's this chorus with all these different voices, high, low, and in between. This beautiful.
No, it looks like this.
It's like this.
Yeah.
It's not one size fits all. It's not. It's all of these, all of us, and then part of the other thing, if I may say this, Jodee, the fact that you are not only an author, but an extremely talented graphic artist and publisher and behaviorist.
Yeah.
How you've been able to work with what we've all been doing, and in the middle of Liz's demise, to keep your creativity and to generate the whole book about embracing Zach and the embraced movement, the creativity you have, the energy you have, the passion you have, it's just phenomenal. And these are the things that the statistical research never touches on. The strengths, all of these strengths.
And because you'll find me in one of the lived experience people as Patti, right? So,
Yeah.
So I mean, I just think about us, all four of us, we're all professionals. And we all have done years of work. When we first started Red Shoes Rock, RJ and I talked because I said, RJ, I think, and he says, oh yeah, I think. And he said, don't let anyone know, because I want you to be a bridge. You're already with people that respect you. Don't tell them you are one of us. And I'd say things like, we've got to work with our people. And they'd say, do you own these people? It's like, no, they're part of me, but I didn't say that, right? Because I always felt like whenever I was with a group of people with FSD, I felt comfortable, or especially in the Indigenous communities, I felt very comfortable because they're also very open and the whole situation, right? They've been very honest and had a lot of integrity in this, and looked at it with different eyes, and looked at it with observation, and not looked at it linearly, or not looked at it as, I'm going to get this with my ego. If I do this, I'm going to help my people. And so I always came into the
It's not looked at through a lens of control.
No.
Looked at through a lens of being and isness.
Yes. And being.
We look at each other through authenticity, not through control.
So I think you find some people like me out there. My brain is very different. And you guys have been able to walk through it, but you've seen how scattered and glittery and magical it can be. And
like a fountain. You're like a fountain.
Or a fireworks.
You're one of the most brilliant people I've ever known, Jodee, in this world. I can't
and Patti
begin
too.
to keep up with you.
Patti
yes,
too.
Absolutely. And I thought so people can read my book, 13 Moons, and Antonia's book, Parenting Your Porcupine, Patti's book, Sip by Sip. And then they can sit back and read this great mystery story called Embracing Zach, which combines so much of what we've all done in a story that I literally could not put down when I read it. It is a great mystery.
It's a great story.
That's why in my book
so much through the story.
recommendation, I say save it for a weekend, because you're not able to put it down.
That was true for me.
An inhaler.
Yeah, it's got 5-star reviews. I mean, and we were able, this is a big deal. We were able to get 25 reviews without doing what most authors do, which is they buy them. And it's like, yes, we did it, and it's, but the story's good. The story is
so
good.
How do people get these books?
Amazon. Just go to Amazon. You can look up, and eventually we'll all be on Amazon by the time spring is here. We're all going to be published there. You can find us all there. I'm happy with the reviews. I'm happy with how that people of all different kinds of disciplines are seeing it and understanding it, and it's resonating. It's resonating with veterans, and it's resonating with grandfathers, and it's resonating with grandmoms, and it's resonating with teenagers. What better place than to have teenagers do this?
So let me just say, Jodee, you are such a gifted writer.
Oh yeah,
you are. That's true.
A gifted writer. Because we're not reading the story, we're living it. We are in that small Midwestern town with the characters.
That's well said.
The way your words they jump off the page and into our lives. And the fact that this is a sequel to something that you wrote 20 years ago, and you've imported the characters from 20 years ago into this story, but highlighting not just FASD in both, but also relevant social issues of the time.
That's right.
When you said a moment ago that veterans relate to Embracing Zach, because Embracing Zach tackles not only FASD and making it more recognizable, but also other neurodiversities as well.
So right? Much. Such as lovely.
The PTSD, ADHD, autism, it's all there. And
beautifully there.
Yeah, beautifully there, yes. And all the characters are just so quirky and so us, right? And it's a beautiful thing. But then the prequel to this, The Whitest Wall, that you wrote 20 years ago, where many of the same characters are 20 years younger in that former book. It was FASD, but it was also racism.
Mhm.
And I will say that because of the emphasis in society on tribalism in recent years, where we are looking at who our people are and the identity, the focus on micro identity, this issue of racism is just as important now, just as relevant now as it ever was. And so I would recommend to everyone listening and watching, pick that book up too.
Oh,
And you won't be sorry. I could not put that book down either. And I'm really looking forward to your next release, which is going to land in time in between The Whitest Wall and Embracing Zach. And I'm really excited to see that. And it's going to be tackling not only the FASD, but anti-Semitism, which is another huge issue that is relevant today.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I really like that. And I also
you.
want to say that I treasure among the four of us the fact that because of our authenticity in all of our interactions, we cannot stay in the theoretical frame of mind. When I first teamed up with the four of you, I was so totally neurobehavioral model, and that's the end all be all. I was kind of weaving in my experiences as an adoption social worker, with intergenerational trauma, loss issues, adoption issues, because I have a lot of in-depth training in adoption issues from a nationally certified program. I'm a TBRI practitioner, so I have all the trauma-informed stuff.
Yep.
But I was
three
still
master's degrees. You've got a lot of skills there.
well, yeah, and a 30-year career. I mean, I'm new to FASD. I only started delving into it probably 6 years ago or so, when I recognized from my training at Facets that, oh, I do that. Oh, good golly, I do that too, right? And then asked my mom, yeah, thanks to this exercise, a creative exercise that I understand came from you, Antonia, even, well, from one of your clients. Of course, someone with lived experience finds a powerful way to really, I mean, that exercise is what led to my discovery to ask my mom, did you drink with me?
Talking about when in Facets, when they ask you to make the brain drawing.
Yes, draw your brain, and it's a wonderful exercise where you think about, what does my brain look like when it's working, when it's doing something, and it's a way of really broaching the subject of neurodiversity, because people compare and discuss what they've come up with. Everyone walks away with the realization, made concrete through art, that we all perceive things differently. We all conceptualize things differently. No two people conceptualize something in the same way. And that's the springboard to neurodiversity. And that's the springboard to the curiosity that the four of us have been discussing so far in this conversation. We don't get anywhere understanding ourselves or anyone else without curiosity, right? But my interactions with all four of you every Tuesday for the past year have really stretched and grown me, and really led to the changes that I made in this upcoming second edition of Sip by Sip. Right. I added more interviews. Jodee, thank you for becoming a chapter in my book. And I think I brought in RJ, and I brought in, I can't think at the moment.
Carl Young. Carl Young
Carl
is
Young.
in.
I brought in Carl
And
Young.
he's
Yeah.
got, they're part of our team too on the male side. So we've got a bigger team than
Just the four of us.
just the four of us. Yeah.
Yeah, the boys have their own little mini team. So the six of us are we have not gathered on one screen, the six of us. But yeah, there is that close association. But I think it was our discussions over the past year that really nailed it down for me, that, you know, we think of spectrums as linear beings, right? With the most impacted on one end and the least impacted on the other. But that's not the reason that doesn't work for those of us living with FASD, is because we are not linear beings. None of us are linear beings. We cannot be that summarily described.
You developed a model about that, Patti, that I think is so valuable.
Yeah.
Because could you share that model, because it's in the round, and it's incredibly powerful to think of it that way, instead of this low flat binary. It really, what you've developed is really much more, it seems to be much more whole and true.
Yeah, it's a three-dimensional model because we are so complex. It's a multifaceted and multidimensional because it's not just a round sphere. It has hard edges because we do too.
Yeah. And it moves. It's not stagnant. It's not like it, I think a linear profile just stays stagnant, but this can bounce and spin and jump out of your hands, and
it can reflect light because it's faceted, right? Like a diamond can throw the light back off, because we have our glimmers. We have lots of glimmers.
Lots and lots.
But
which is probably why it makes it so hard for people who are not, who can't see inside the body culture, to be able to say, well, it doesn't look like it's hard. What's so hard? You've got a symmetrical body, you got 2 eyes, 2 ears, you got all that stuff. What do you mean it's hard?
Normal.
What do you mean it's hard?
Yeah. And I love that.
On and off? What do you mean it blinks on and off? Some days you can, some days it's gone. What are you talking about?
And I love that emphasis that you introduce to your readers, Antonia, about body culture. I have not read in my 30 years of being a professional in various fields, whether it's addictions or mental health or child welfare, I've never heard anyone phrase it that way. But, just the impact of being a living being in this skin suit, right?
In the skin suit.
Having to pay attention to how we interact with the environment. Most of us just go through life interacting with the environment with no clue how we are doing that. Right? Just like with our internal frame of reference, we assume everyone thinks like we do. Mm-hmm. We're caught off guard when someone's going off the rails or they don't understand.
Mm-hmm. When something's different, when there's a mismatch. Yeah. It's pretty natural, but it's also perplexing, as you say. It's perplexing. Well, when we really attend to what another human being's experience is, when we attune. I mean, Gabor Mate and his son wrote about it. Nobody should have to choose between attunement and authenticity. It's an untenable conflict to have to pick one versus the other. I think that's part of what I value so much in our collaboration, in our team, is that we can have our conflicts and our various perspectives and our points of asking each other questions and refining details and sorting through things without having to sacrifice either one of those two basic things that we really need as human beings, and being able to get that message out to families and teachers and persons living with this, to be able to just increase the sense of confidence that people can have in themselves and in their process of coming to be in that skin suit. You know, we're all doing our best. I think Deb says it well. We're all doing our best with what we have at the time in a skin suit to figure out how to navigate. We're doing the best we can. And when we run into glitches, when sometimes something works pretty well and other times it doesn't work so well, that's a part of the human experience. But some of us have limps that are more pronounced than others. And living with something like that it's not as easy as it might seem.
Yeah. Deb, can you share with everybody the focus of your book and what it is that you are bringing to the next generations? Like, all of us have talked at length about, you know, and I'm the baby of the group. And yet I am in my 60s. So, you know, I'm also starting to think about legacy. And so the 4 books that we have written over the past years, you know, that are coming out now, thanks to Jodee. What is the legacy work that you are imparting in 13 Moons?
Okay, 13 Moons is based on my work. It's my work and what I've discovered and learned through the last almost 40 years of being in this field and working with so many amazing people around the world. My deepest love in the field is with Indigenous cultures. And I have learned so much. I mean, I could almost tear up, and how much I have learned working with, in fact, I am tearing up, working with Indigenous people mostly around North America, and what I have learned from them. And so this book takes the process of dealing with fetal prenatal alcohol exposure and everything that goes with it, the traumas, everything is like being in a dark forest. And, you know, I live in the Alaska wilderness. I know about dark forests and brown bears, grizzly bears. We call them brown bears up here. And I know about all of that and lived experience with that. So, and, you know, going through a dark forest, dealing with the dark forest of what to do with this entire subject. And there's a moonbeam, and the moonbeam shines through the forest, showing us the pathway through. And so in the Native American tradition of 13 moons or 13 months, this follows that tradition. And so we learned about fetal alcohol spectrum disorders, the trauma, all the things that go with that through one calendar year. You know, and so each
the lunar calendar.
Of the and the Indigenous calendar year. In that traditional way of looking at it through 13 moons. And so each moon has a lesson and a way through the dark forest.
Exactly.
So it's written with an Indigenous perspective as much as me, as a person with Norwegian ancestry and a little bit of Sami back there. So I have a little bit of Indigenous blood in me, but through that, as much as I can do as a Nordic ancestry person, learning from Indigenous culture. So it's with that. So it's a very simple, it's just a simple story of ways through the forest. And I'm excited for it to come out. It's really close to being, it'll be published soon.
It's so beautiful.
Yeah.
So beautiful.
So one of, you know, part of what I wanted to do today is just kind of seed the excitement. Our works, and of course, Embracing Zach was the first one out the gate, and it is absolutely wonderful. And
I want to say something about that because I do need to do a shout out. I originally was a consultant, FASD consultant with Joel Chagrin. And Joel's idea was to create a documentary, and he started the Embrace movement, which is instead of coming against each other, let's embrace the culture. Let's figure out how to hold on to each other,
Oh,
and
that's
and
wonderful.
to love each other and to be compassionate with each other. Let's figure that out. This is not the end of the world, right? And so I jumped onto his documentary, which was going to be a 90-minute documentary. Thank you. It was going to be a 90-minute documentary, and it was going to bring out the truth about FASD. So that was what it was called, The Truth of FASD. Well, that ended up being transmedia. And I think I'd like to share a little bit, because what happened was Joel was working with another producer, Justin Overlander, who's working on a wonderful Christmas movie right now. And one of my customers came to him and said, why don't you look at Jodee's work? You haven't seen what she wrote in Whitest Wall. And they read that, and then they came to me and said, would you rewrite this book in today's 20 years later? And I'm like, oh, we can't use race. We shouldn't use creed. Let's pick something else. And so we chose neurodiversity to expose FASD in a natural sense, which is what it does in Whitest Wall. It exposes it in something you can see, which was at that point prejudice and of both religion and color of skin. And it took 18 years before we started really speaking that one out. But we did that with neurodiversity, with ASD, autism, ASD, the levels there, and there are multiple levels. PTSD with veterans, and Afghanistan and Vietnam and all that kind of thing. And so we've got older ages and younger ages comparing, the healing process. And then we've got an incredible level 1 autistic child, or a young man with autism, and he is wonderful and brilliant and funny. And then we have a child that is not diagnosed, but signifies ADHD. You'll find out more later. I'm not going to spoil it. Anyway, so they, you know the answer. Yes. Anyway,
we
so
love them.
so, and I love her, because if you want to know the character that's built off of me, it's that character. So those that know me will see me in that character. It's actually 2 of my personalities are in there. So you have to guess the other one, and it's not Kate. So
Give the secret away.
don't give the secret away. No,
I won't.
Yeah. So anyway, so the guys, then it became, we're going to do a movie. Justin's like, let's do a movie. He's a producer. And it's like, oh my goodness, can you write the story? So I wrote the story. He wrote the screenplay. The screenplay is lovely. It's written. We're doing funding for it. It's, movies aren't free. We have to, do we cast with everybody in town, or do we cast with people that have experience that are going to step on and be paid professional wages? So we would have to pay for the people that we're hoping to cast into the movie. Meanwhile, Joel and Carl Young, Joel Chagrin and Carl Young, get together as the female team is off doing our little 4 books, and they start sitting over coffee and talking about being dads with FASD. And they say there's no books with dads with FASD where we're just talking about what it's like. And Carl also is one of the players in your Sip by Sip, who discovered late in life that he also had it because of his child. He saw his child and realized that he also was exposed to fetal alcohol or prenatal alcohol. Anyway, so their book right now is 500 pages. So I'm sure there's going to be some editing down there, but they are totally into it. It's a father's approach. We've never done that before. I really am excited because, 2 dads over coffee are looking at this situation, trying to say, what do we do next? This isn't just the way it seems. It's like something different, and they really dig deeper. So I'm excited for them. I'm excited for all of us, because what was our goal? Our goal was to take this up to a new platform and qualitative. How can we make everybody with our legacy work be?
And that's the beautiful thing about our collaboration, is because through chewing all this over, we've had, the discussion today that's being recorded for the podcast is really no different than any of the discussions we have week after week, where we're really hashing through things And we've come upon, these are the central core things
Mhm.
that are so important. They need to be in each of our work somehow,
Mhm.
because we want people, no matter where they turn, no matter what they pick up to read or to watch, to be picking up these certain key threads.
I think that's really valuable.
Yeah.
It's one thing, it's one thing to look at an experience like a person with FASD and to come to memorize, okay, this is what the symptoms are, blah, blah, blah. But it's another thing to connect with the life of that person and say, oh my goodness, this is what they're doing. These are all the things they're creating. This is their being. And yeah, they have this, but this person is doing all of this. That's a very different experience. It's as if one goes from just head knowledge to the heart.
Mhm.
And that ability to be able to just stay down in one's heart and perceive a comfort with neurodiversity, that's completely different than what the monoculture tells us to do, which is to pigeonhole everything and everyone as if we've got to point at one another, as if we're all wearing baseball jackets with different teams on them, and we're all separate. And the thing that comes through to me in all of the writing and in the efforts of Joel and Carl as well for the guys team is there's an effort to try and move beyond us and them. And that's something the Indigenous writer Sherry Mitchell described in detail. She said, this otherizing that happens in the culture, this is so bad for all of us.
Yeah.
It's so hard on all of us.
And that's what our culture at large has been doing over the past close to a decade.
Long time.
Really sent all collectively backwards.
Yes.
Actually, we've been doing it since invasion of America, basically, because we have not learned that from Indigenous culture, because they embrace everyone. They embrace, I mean, traditional, healthy Indigenous culture embraces all people from different perspectives, different,
There's
neurodiversities and all the other kinds of differences.
There's
they choose heart-wise.
Yeah.
They choose to be heart-wise. You can be head-wise or heart-wise, and heart-wise is just as important and more so, I think, important than head-wise. And that's what I see with the kids and the people with FASD is they're often very heart-wise.
You bet.
And that's
they are. That's true. That's true.
I absolutely agree with that. And that's what I've seen. That's what I've experienced in the 30 years of the hard work and the good work with all of this subject, with all of this topic, with the experiences of providing and being with.
Jodee, our collaboration is what led you to say, Patti, I think I want to be one of the chapters in your book. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Oh my gosh, I didn't know that. That touches my heart so much. Oh man. Wow.
I saw the integrity, Patti. I saw, and you were in the process of discovering your own, and you and we all had a different path as we walked with Liz, because in the midst of all this, Liz was part of our team. I mean, she would be throwing up in the toilet, and we would be on a meeting, and we'd be counseling with her, or she would be in bed in pain, and she was part of us, and we would ask her.
And she would get on the Zoom screen and say hello and say a few words.
Ask a question or
absolutely
information down. I mean, she was as much part of our beginning as anyone, and would have been part of your book, right? And I thought, and originally I thought, I'd already come out and blowing Jeff Noble's brain away because he couldn't believe that would be true. But you know what? The bottom line is my mom and dad were really good at drinking. and you know what they did? This is something that's really important. They quit drinking, had 35 years of sobriety, lived an
Wow.
incredible life,
Yep.
restored their family, and loved their children. And they loved their children through their drinking. You need to know that. Just
Sure,
because
of
people
course.
drink
Yeah.
does not mean they
Yeah,
don't love
yeah.
their children. It's a different
Absolutely right.
thing. And I always, because in today's world, I probably would have been a foster child and we probably would have been pulled. But in the time I grew up, I know that if they pulled any one of us, we were so connected because of the alcoholism, because we were, because when my parents were drinking, the children pulled together as a
You
team.
pulled together.
We would have destroyed a family. We would have done everything we could
You
to
would
get
have
back
blown them
home.
sky high.
They wouldn't have known what was hitting them, you know? And we would have been planning. I mean, we wouldn't have been just an easy thing. We would have been trying to figure and plan and setting them up. Yeah, it would have been
I've
war.
seen and worked
You
with
would have been Zach and Q.
children did that because they were trying to hold on to each other and they were going to blow up anything that came against them because of their need to stay together.
So I think, Patti, I think that, Catherine Page and I and Carl and Emily, Emily, who was diagnosed early, I do not have a diagnosis, but I have pictures. I don't need to be, I know how I am. I know what happened when Liz got sicker. The more I lost me, the more I lost my structure, the more I lost my routines, the more I lost my ability that I had built around myself to be in control, right? The control pieces I'd put in to be strong and manage my life, and the colored files and the colored, all these little things that Zach does, some of these, because those are the things that are put in place for him. I still to this, I'll go out and chop wood. If I'm overwhelmed, I got myself a chainsaw. And I can get chainsawed, and I'm going to go get some of that buckthorn out of my yard, or out of the woods. So there's just some things there that as I saw Liz get, leaving this earth, and me trying to hang on and letting go more of me to try to hang on to her, help her through this. There wasn't a question. There wasn't a question. Now, of course, I'm back, right? The Jodee's coming back. I'm pulling back some of my structure. My desk is getting cleaner again. Bags of garbage are going out of my office. 100,000 pages of medical records are on digital instead of sitting all over. So I'm able to masquerade again. I'm able to camouflage again. I'm able to pull all the pieces that are good. Now, there's things I can't do, but I'll try, So you learn to do what you do well, as we all do. We fit our niche, and I fit my niche really well.
You sure
and the dogs don't care.
That's my watch poodle. That's Sadie, my dog.
Yeah, well, I got 4 here today, so 4 here today and no furnace. 13 below.
Pile up on those doggies. Bring those doggies on.
I got
those
a wood
portable
stove.
Heaters.
Yeah, this is where the wood comes in real handy.
Those fur lap warmers.
Well, ladies, thank you so much for making this first episode of season 3 just so special. So very special. I hope that the world can just love on you guys the way I have come to love on you guys.
Oh, we love you too. We love you too.
We do love you. We do love you. This team has been really,
Yeah, we'll stay behind you, Patti. We're going to probably all leave our legacy and move on, but we're going to be there for you. So the Meliorists will continue, but you're going to be our front person.
Yeah, for as long as I keep doing it.
Yeah.
But this is legacy work for me as well, because I mean, like I said, I'm already in my 60s. I do have health issues. Since we run with 428 comorbid conditions, I actually have several. So I don't know. I mean, none of us know the future.
None of us
be here for another dozen years. We could get hit by a bus tomorrow. Well, probably not in Williston, North Dakota. I don't know if we have any buses here.
Or Homer, Alaska. It's hard to find a bus there.
I get
But,
trampled by a
but
moose.
we never know. You know, we all serve the God who does know the number of days we are each assigned. But you know, at least in the way I believe, we will be laid to rest when we are done with the work that he has for us to do. And we don't know when we're going to do the last thing on his to-do list. But we'll just keep plugging away. And Jodee, I know you and I have another book that we will start writing on probably a couple months from now, after things calm down and we catch our breath a little bit.
And
But-
Antonia and I have another project we're going to start after both our books are out. So we'll fill you in.
You want to tease the rest of the world on that?
To come.
Okay.
A little early. It's a little early, but
A little
Yeah.
early.
percolating.
Right. Well, this is exciting. But okay, so where we are in terms of timelines, I think, Jodee, we just have a couple tweaks left on Sip by Sip second edition. And Antonia, yours has gone out or will be going out to, you have previewers. I
Tiny
think.
tweaks.
It has tiny one last round of tiny tweaks, and then it will be going to previewers.
Yeah, to fill up your praise for
I'm so
parenting
excited.
the porcupine section.
I
Yeah,
can't
and-
even believe it. But
and
people are
Deb's-
responding and saying yes, they will. And then we've gotta get 13 moons. We gotta get
13 Moons is right behind.
out
So it'll be out soon too.
And it's already poured. So it's already in book form. It's just, it hasn't been,
Oh,
it hasn't been needled and tweedled yet, but it will be, you know, yeah. And then
it'll be
final, I will announce what the final one for me is going to be, because Lizzie started the book series, The Best I Can Be Living with FASD. I will complete the book series with another tiny book, like hers, Best I Can Be, 116 pages or 100 pages. And it will be called Iridescent Spoon, Reflections and Observations of a Caregiver. There is not a book of being a caregiver of a person of FASD, and I think I can give that insight to help encourage other families. So
That's great.
that will be my heart project. And who knows when it comes out? Comes out when it does.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that and then the interim book on your novel series.
Yeah, that was 3/4 done. So that's not that much done. So we get all your guys' work done. Maybe we take a break and needle together
Yeah.
Tiger Butterfly.
Yeah. Tiger Butterfly.
Those are just
That's
so
such
fun.
a cool name too.
Yeah.
So
So fun.
yeah, reflects the dichotomy of life, right? We have
Yeah,
to
and-
be fierce and yet also frail.
And I got the best picture. I have a tiger butterfly with a butterfly that had its tail bit off. So it's missing a part and it's flying. And it's just like, yes. Yes. So,
All right. So thank you again for joining me today and recording this wonderful podcast. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Living with FASD, Candid Conversations with Patti Kasper. Feel free to send comments, questions, and topics you'd like to learn more about, hear more about, to me at livingwithfasdpodcast@gmail.com. Please remember to like, follow, and share this podcast on whatever platform you use so that more people can find the podcast. Have a blessed week, everyone, and tune in next Monday for another candid conversation on Living with FASD.